Get ready for a wild ride through history, because being single was a whole vibe for some pretty famous folks. Imagine a queen who ruled a golden age for over 44 years, telling everyone her country was her only spouse. Picture one of the world's greatest inventors, a man who literally lit up our lives believing romance would dim his brilliant brain and preferring the company of pigeons. And what about the author who penned some of the most beloved love stories ever, yet chose a solo chapter for her own life? We are diving deep into the real stories, the ups and downs of 7 incredible people who navigated life without a +1 at least for a very long time. Their reasons were as unique as they were filled with purpose, passion, and sometimes a bit of heartache. These are their stories, packed with facts, dates, and amazing insights into what it really meant to be single in their times. Number 7. Henry David Thoreau and the Ultimate Self-Partnered Retreat. Henry David Thoreau. You have probably heard of him. He is the guy who went to live in the woods. But this was not just a camping trip. It was a full-on experiment in living. Born on July 12, 1817 in Concord, Massachusetts, Thoreau was a thinker, a writer, and a man who questioned pretty much everything about the way people live. He was not a fan of society's expectations, especially the rush to get a job, make money, and settle down. So, what did he do? On July 4, 1845, a date he chose for its symbolism of independence, Thoreau moved into a tiny cabin he built himself. It was on the shore of Walden Pond, near Concord. He wanted to live simply, to really figure out what was important in life. He famously wrote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." For 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, this little cabin was his world. And in this world, he was very much single. This singleness was not just a side note. It was kind of the whole point. Thoreau wanted to strip away all the extras, and for him, a conventional family life seemed like one of those extras. He wanted to prove that a person could be self-reliant, content, and deeply connected to the world without needing a spouse or the usual hustle and bustle of family. His cabin cost him exactly $28.12 to build. He grew his own food, mostly beans, and spent his days observing nature, writing, and thinking. Did he get lonely? That is a question people still ask. Thoreau wrote a lot about solitude. He said, "I find it wholesome to be alone the greater part of the time." He also wrote, "I am no more lonely than a single mullein or dandelion in a pasture, or a bean leaf or sorrel or a horsefly or a bumblebee. I am no more lonely than the millbrook or a weathercock or the North Star or the south wind or an April shower or a January thaw or the first spider in a new house." Sounds like he found company in everything around him. He believed that true loneliness came from not being connected to oneself, not from being physically alone. But was it all peaceful, bean farming, and philosophical musings? Life is rarely that simple. There was a woman named Ellen Sewell. In 1839, before his Walden experiment, Henry and his brother John both fell for Ellen. John proposed first, and Ellen's father made her turn him down. Then Henry wrote a letter proposing marriage to her in November 1840. She initially accepted, but her parents, particularly her mother, disapproved of the Thoreaus, seeing them as too radical and unconventional. Ellen, under pressure, broke it off. Some say this experience might have colored Henry's views on marriage, or at least made him wary of its complications. He never pursued marriage again with such directness. In his masterpiece, Walden, or Life in the Woods, published in 1854, 7 years after he left the pond, he talks about the traps of conventional life. He saw people working endlessly for things they did not truly need, sacrificing their freedom and joy. He questioned the institution of marriage if it meant losing oneself. He wrote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." He did not want that. His single life at Walden was his attempt to escape that desperation and find a different way. The joys for Thoreau in his single state, especially at Walden, seem clear. He had complete freedom. Freedom to structure his days as he wished, to think his own thoughts without interruption, to engage deeply with nature. This period was incredibly productive for his writing. He was not just living, he was observing, recording, and creating. His connection to the natural world was profound. He described the looms on the pond, the changing seasons, the sounds of the woods with incredible detail and passion. This was his chosen companionship. Were there sorrows? Perhaps the sorrow of being misunderstood. Many of his contemporaries thought he was eccentric, a hermit, even lazy for not participating in society in the expected way. His famous night in jail in July 1846 for refusing to pay a poll tax, an act of protest against slavery and the Mexican-American War, happened while he was living at Walden. He was bailed out the next day, reportedly against his will, by his aunt. This event led to his famous essay, Civil Disobedience. His single status arguably gave him the freedom to take such stands without worrying about the impact on a family. After leaving Walden Pond in September 1847, Thoreau moved back into Ralph Waldo Emerson's house for a time, working as a handyman and continuing his writing. He never married and lived mostly in his family home in Concord until his death from tuberculosis on May 6, 1862, at the young age of 44. His single life was not one of grand romantic gestures unfulfilled, but rather a conscious shaping of a life centered on principles of independence, simplicity, and deep thought. He found richness in solitude and connection in nature. He once wrote, "A man is rich in proportion to the number of things which he can afford to let alone." For Thoreau, perhaps, a conventional married life was one of those things he chose to let alone, allowing him the space to pursue a different kind of richness. His legacy is not just in his words, but in the example he set, an example that continues to inspire people to question, to simplify, and to live deliberately whether single or partnered. Number 6. Florence Nightingale and the Calling, that outshone romance. Florence Nightingale. The name itself sounds like a gentle psalm. We know her as the Lady with the Lamp, the founder of modern nursing, a true hero who revolutionized healthcare. But did you know that this incredible woman, born on May 12, 1820, into a wealthy British family, made a very conscious decision to remain single? And it was all because of a powerful sense of mission. In her time, for a woman of her class, marriage was the expected path. It meant security, social standing, and a family. Florence had suitors, and not just any suitors. One of the most persistent was Richard Monckton Milnes, a politician and poet who courted her for 9 years. He was intelligent, charming, and deeply in love with her. By all accounts, Florence was fond of him too. She wrote in her diary about the intellectual companionship he offered. So why did she say no? Florence felt she had a calling from God. As early as 1837, when she was just 16, she wrote that God had called her to his service. At first, she did not know what this service would be. Gradually, her path became clear: nursing. In those days, nursing was not a respected profession. Hospitals were often dirty, and nurses were typically untrained and sometimes of low repute. Florence wanted to change that. She believed it was her life's work, and here is where her single status becomes crucial. Florence believed that marriage and family life would be incompatible with her mission. In a private note from around 1851, she wrestled with Milne's proposal, writing, "I have an intellectual nature which requires satisfaction, and that would find it in him. I have a passion nature which requires satisfaction, and that would not find it in his life." She feared that, as a wife, her time and energy would be consumed by domestic duties and social obligations, leaving no room for the demanding work she envisioned. She once wrote, "I do not wish to be a wife, a mother, a mistress of a household. These are not my vocation." The sorrow in this choice, if we can call it that, was perhaps the sacrifice of personal companionship and the conventional comforts of family life. She acknowledged the pain of her decision regarding Milne's writing. "I think he is the man I could have loved, the man who could have made me happy." It was not that she was against love or marriage in principle, but she saw it as a path she could not take if she were to fulfill her destiny. She wrote to her father in 1846, "My positive, decided, fixed, and known object for the last 7 years has been to obtain a regular training as a sick nurse." This was her focus. The joy, or rather the profound satisfaction, came from her unwavering dedication to her work and the immense impact she had. When the Crimean War broke out in 1853, reports of horrific conditions for wounded soldiers reached Britain. Sidney Herbert, the Secretary at War, and a friend of Florence's, asked her to lead a team of nurses to the military hospital in Scutari, Turkey. She arrived in November 1854 with 38 nurses. What she found was a nightmare. More soldiers were dying from diseases like typhus, cholera, and dysentery than from battle wounds. The hospital was overcrowded, filthy, and lacked basic supplies. Florence and her team got to work. They cleaned the wards, improved sanitation, organized laundry, and provided better food and care. Her dedication was legendary. She worked tirelessly, often for 20 hours a day. At night, she would walk the dark halls with her lamp, checking on the soldiers, earning her famous nickname. Her single status allowed her this complete immersion. Could a married woman of that era, with wifely and perhaps maternal duties, have abandoned her home for such a dangerous and demanding mission? It seems unlikely. Florence had no husband to consult or children to consider. Her family became the soldiers she cared for and the nurses she trained. The numbers tell a story of incredible impact. Within 6 months of her arrival in Scutari, the death rate at the hospital dropped from a staggering 42% to just 2%. This was a revolution. After the war, she returned to England in 1856 as a national hero, but she did not rest. She used her fame and her meticulous data collection, she was a brilliant statistician, to campaign for healthcare reform. Her 830-page report, Notes on Matters Affecting the Health, Efficiency, and Hospital Administration of the British Army, led to major changes. For much of her later life, Florence was an invalid, suffering from what many now believe was chronic brucellosis, possibly contracted during the Crimean War, combined with depression. Yet, even from her bed, she continued her work, writing thousands of letters, reports, and books. She established the Nightingale Training School for Nurses at St. Thomas's Hospital in London in 1860, laying the foundation for professional nursing. She never expressed regret for choosing her calling over marriage. Her life was one of purpose. She once said, "I attribute my success to this. I never gave or took any excuse." Her single-mindedness, quite literally, was her strength. She chose a path of service, and in doing so, she sacrificed certain personal joys for a larger, world-changing mission. Her sorrow might have been the personal cost of that choice, but her joy was in the millions of lives she touched and continues to touch through her legacy. Florence Nightingale died on August 13, 1910, at the age of 90, unmarried, but wedded to a cause that saved countless lives. Number 5. Isaac Newton and the Gravity of a Solitary Mind. Sir Isaac Newton. The man who supposedly had an apple fall on his head and came up with the theory of gravity. He gave us the laws of motion, calculus, and a whole new understanding of light and color. Born prematurely on Christmas Day, 1642, by the old calendar, January 4th, 1643, by the new, he was so small they said he could fit into a quart mug. This giant of science lived a life largely devoid of romantic relationships, a life dedicated almost entirely to his monumental intellectual pursuits. Newton never married. In fact, there is very little evidence he ever had any romantic entanglements at all. His life was one of intense focus, bordering on obsession with his work. Was this a choice that brought him joy, or a consequence of a personality that found human connection difficult? The records are sparse on his personal feelings about it, but his lifestyle speaks volumes. From a young age, Newton was a solitary figure. His father died before he was born, and when Isaac was 3, his mother remarried and left him in the care of his maternal grandmother. This early separation might have shaped his ability to form close attachments. He was described as a quiet, thoughtful boy, often preoccupied with making models and mechanical devices rather than playing with other children. His academic brilliance was undeniable. He went to Trinity College, Cambridge, in 1661. When the Great Plague hit England in 1665, the university closed, and Newton returned to his family home at Woolsthorpe Manor for about 18 months. This period, often called his Annus Mirabilis, or Year of Wonders, was incredibly productive. It was during this time of relative isolation that he began to lay the groundwork for his theories on calculus, optics, and, yes, gravity. His single, undistracted state arguably allowed for this profound immersion in scientific thought. Newton was notoriously private and often secretive about his work. He could be prickly, suspicious, and engaged in bitter disputes with other scientists like Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz over the invention of calculus and Robert Hooke over optics and gravity. These intense intellectual battles seem to occupy the space that personal relationships might have filled for others. There are a couple of faint whispers of potential female companionship, but they are very faint. As a young man before Cambridge, he was reportedly engaged for a short time to a Miss Story, the daughter of an apothecary where he lodged. The story goes that he became so engrossed in his studies that the romance faded. Later in life, his half-niece, Catherine Barton, lived with him in London when he was warden and later master of the mint. She was vivacious and charming and ran his household. While there were rumors about her relationship with Charles Montague, Earl of Halifax, Newton's patron, Newton himself seems to have remained avuncular and detached. The joys of Newton's single life were intrinsically linked to his scientific achievements. He had unparalleled freedom to dedicate himself to his studies. Imagine the hours, days, and years of uninterrupted concentration required to formulate the Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, one of the most important scientific books ever written. This work laid out his laws of motion and the law of universal gravitation. Could he have achieved this with the demands of a wife and children in that era? It is debatable. His single status afforded him the luxury of time and mental space. He often forgot to eat or sleep when engrossed in a problem. This kind of all-consuming dedication is easier to maintain when one's life is entirely one's own. Were there sorrows? perhaps a profound loneliness, though he never explicitly stated it. His alchemical pursuits, which occupied him for many years and were kept largely secret, might suggest a solitary, almost mystical quest for knowledge. He was deeply religious, though his views were unconventional, and he kept them private to avoid conflict with the Church of England. This internal world of intense thought, complex faith, and alchemical exploration was one he largely navigated alone. His focus was so intense that he sometimes seemed oblivious to the world around him. Stories abound of his absent-mindedness, like trying to put his finger in his pipe instead of tobacco, or forgetting he had eaten. While perhaps exaggerated, these anecdotes paint a picture of a man whose mind was always elsewhere deep in the cosmos, or the intricacies of mathematics. Newton held several prestigious positions. He was Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at Cambridge, a Member of Parliament for the University Warden, and then Master of the Royal Mint, where he reformed the currency and pursued counterfeiters with surprising zeal. He was President of the Royal Society from 1703 until his death. He was knighted by Queen Anne in 1705, becoming Sir Isaac Newton. These were public roles, but his personal life remained intensely private. He died on March 20th, 1727, Old Style, March 31st, New Style. At the age of 84, he left behind a legacy that reshaped humanity's understanding of the universe. His single life was not one he discussed or philosophized about in the way Thoreau did. It simply was a life poured into the crucible of scientific inquiry, a life where the pursuit of knowledge was the ultimate, all-consuming passion. The universe was his partner, and its secrets were his pursuit. For Newton, the equations and the stars might have offered a companionship more profound than any human relationship could. Number 4. Jane Austen and the Art of Observing Love from the Sidelines. Jane Austen. Her name is synonymous with romance, with witty heroines finding their way to love and marriage in beautifully crafted novels like Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. She gave us Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, Emma Woodhouse and Mr. Knightley. Yet, the woman who wrote so perceptively about courtship and matrimony never married herself. Born on December 16, 1775, Jane Austen's own life story had a different kind of ending than those she penned for her characters. For a woman of her gentry class in late 18th and early 19th century England, marriage was not just a romantic ideal. It was an economic and social necessity for many. Women had few opportunities for independent careers or financial security. Yet, Jane chose or perhaps found herself in a single life. It is not that she had no prospects or romantic experiences. There are a few notable episodes. One involves Tom Lefroy, an Irish law student she met in 1795 when she was 20. Letters to her sister Cassandra reveal a flirtatious, lively connection. Jane wrote, "I am almost afraid to tell you how my Irish friend and I behaved. Imagine to yourself everything most profligate and shocking in the way of dancing and sitting down together. But Lefroy was not wealthy, and his family likely expected him to marry someone with a fortune. He left, and the romance, whatever its depth, ended." This experience is often cited as a possible inspiration for some of the romantic tensions in her novels. Then there was the mysterious proposal. In December 1802, when Jane was nearly 27, she received a marriage proposal from Harris Bigg Wither, the younger brother of her friends. He was heir to a considerable estate, Manydown Park. This was, by societal standards, an excellent match. It would have offered Jane financial security and a home for her family. She accepted his proposal. The very next day, she retracted her acceptance. This decision must have been momentous. To turn down such a secure future suggests a strong conviction. Why did she change her mind? Family legend says she did not love him. Her niece, Caroline Austen, wrote that Harris was sensible and kind and good, but plain in person and character and manner. Jane, who wrote so eloquently about marrying for love and respect, apparently could not bring herself to marry for convenience alone, even when the convenience was substantial. This act speaks volumes about her integrity and her desire for a marriage based on genuine affection. So Jane remained Miss Austen. She lived with her family, first in Steventon, then Bath, Southampton, and finally Chawton, where she spent her most productive writing years. Her single status, while perhaps not always easy in a society geared towards marriage, arguably provided her with the time, space, and perspective to become the brilliant novelist she was. The joys of her single life might have been subtle, but significant. She had a close and loving relationship with her sister Cassandra, who also never married. Their bond was a central pillar of Jane's life. She was also a devoted aunt to her many nieces and nephews, observing their lives and dramas with a keen eye. And, crucially, she had her writing. Her novels were her children, as she sometimes referred to them. Her relatively unencumbered life allowed her to focus on her literary craft, to polish her prose, and to create worlds that continue to captivate readers over 200 years later. She observed society, its manners, its hypocrisies, and its heartaches, with an astute and often satirical eye. Being somewhat on the periphery, as an unmarried woman, might have given her a unique vantage point. She was in society, but not fully consumed by its primary domestic roles. This allowed her to be a sharp chronicler of the marriage market she so famously depicted. Were there sorrows? Undoubtedly, there were moments of frustration or perhaps wistfulness. Financial insecurity was a real concern for unmarried women of her class. After her father's death in 1805, Jane, her mother, and Cassandra relied on the support of her brothers. She earned very little from her novels during her lifetime. Pride and Prejudice, for example, was sold outright for £110. Her letters sometimes hint at the limitations and social awkwardness of being an old maid, as unmarried women beyond a certain age were often unkindly termed. She once wrote, "Single women have a dreadful propensity for being poor, which is one very strong argument in favor of matrimony." Yet, her novels themselves are not bitter. They are filled with wit, intelligence, and the belief in the possibility of true partnership. Perhaps her own lack of a Darcy or a Knightley fueled her imagination, allowing her to create these ideal or ideally imperfect romantic heroes. Her heroines are strong, intelligent women who seek more than just a husband. They seek a meeting of minds and hearts. Maybe Jane held out for that kind of connection in her own life. And when it did not materialize in a way she could commit to, she chose independence. Jane Austen died on July 18, 1817, at the age of 41, likely from Addison's disease or Hodgkin's lymphoma. She left behind a legacy of 6 completed novels, a few unfinished works, and a reputation as one of the greatest novelists in the English language. Her single life was not a grand, rebellious statement, but rather a quiet navigation of the circumstances and choices presented to her. She found fulfillment in her family, her faith, and above all in her extraordinary literary gift. She created happy endings for her characters, and in her own way, through her enduring art, she created a lasting legacy for herself, a single woman who understood the human heart better than most. Number 3. Nikola Tesla and the Spark of Solitary Genius. Nikola Tesla. The name conjures images of lightning bolts, mysterious coils, and futuristic inventions. Born on July 10, 1856, in Smiljan, in what was then the Austrian Empire, modern-day Croatia, Tesla was a visionary, an inventor, and an electrical engineer whose work laid the foundation for much of our modern alternating current, ag, electrical system, radio, and countless other technologies. He was also a man who famously, and quite deliberately, remained single his entire life. Tesla believed that marriage and romantic relationships were incompatible with his scientific pursuits. He was utterly devoted to his work, often to the exclusion of everything else, including personal relationships. He once stated, "I do not think you can name many great inventions that have been made by married men." He felt that the emotional and mental energy required for love and family would detract from his ability to invent and discover. For Tesla, his mind was his most precious instrument, and he guarded its focus fiercely. He was known for his eccentricities and his intense, almost obsessive dedication. He claimed to have a photographic memory and the ability to visualize inventions in his mind with such clarity that he could build and test them mentally before ever touching a tool. This internal world of thought and creation was where he lived most vividly. Did he find joy in this solitary path? In many ways it seems he did, or at least he found a profound sense of purpose that eclipsed other desires. He spoke of the thrill of scientific discovery, the joy of invention. His work was his passion, his obsession, and perhaps his truest companion. He would work for days with little sleep, driven by an unyielding curiosity and a desire to unlock the secrets of electricity in the universe. There were stories, though, of a certain fondness for pigeons. In his later years, living in New York City, Tesla would regularly feed the pigeons in Bryant Park and near St. Patrick's Cathedral. He even brought injured pigeons back to his hotel room to nurse them. He spoke of one particular white pigeon with an almost romantic fervor. He reportedly said, "I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman, and she loved me as long as I had her. There was a purpose to my life." When this pigeon died, Tesla claimed that a part of his life's work went with her. This unusual attachment highlights a capacity for deep affection, channeled in a very unconventional way. The sorrows of his single life might be seen in his increasing isolation, especially in his later years. While he was a brilliant showman in his prime, demonstrating his inventions with dramatic flair, he also struggled financially for much of his life. His grand visions, like the Walden Tower project on Long Island, intended for wireless transmission of power and information across the globe, often outstripped his funding. He made fortunes from some patents like those for a polyphase motors, but often lost them or was outmaneuvered in business. His famous War of Currents, with Thomas Edison in the late 1880s and early 1890s, pitted Tesla's alternating current system against Edison's direct current, DC. While Eck ultimately triumphed for power distribution, the battle was fierce and personal. Tesla, backed by George Westinghouse, was the scientific visionary, while Edison was the relentless pragmatist and businessman. Perhaps being single allowed Tesla to take the immense risks he did, to pour all his resources, mental and financial, into his ground-raining but often commercially challenging projects. Tesla lived in a series of New York hotels for decades, moving from one to another as his financial situation fluctuated. He had specific, almost ritualistic, daily habits. He was obsessed with cleanliness and had a fear of germs. He calculated the cubic contents of his food before eating and had a peculiar aversion to round objects, pearl earrings on women, and touching hair. These idiosyncrasies, while part of his unique genius, might have made intimate relationships difficult even if he had desired them. He claimed that his chastity was very helpful to his scientific abilities. He believed that sexual energy, if not expended, could be transmuted into creative and intellectual power. This was not an uncommon idea at the time, but Tesla seemed to take it to an extreme. He saw his inventions as his offspring. Despite his profound impact on modern technology, a power radio, though Marconi often gets the credit initially, remote control, robotics, spark plugs, fluorescent lights, and the Tesla coil are all part of his legacy. On January 7, 1943, at the age of 86, Nikola Tesla was found dead in his room at the Hotel New Yorker. His single life was a deliberate choice, intertwined with his identity as a singular genius. He sacrificed conventional human connections for an all-consuming affair with science. The world reaped the benefits of his focused brilliance. Whether he himself found ultimate personal fulfillment is a complex question. He experienced the exultation of discovery and the bitterness of unfulfilled projects and financial struggles. His legacy is a testament to a mind that dared to dream beyond the confines of his time. A mind that chose the spark of invention over the warmth of a traditional hearth. He once said, "The progressive development of man is vitally dependent on invention." And for Nikola Tesla, invention was life itself. Number 2, Leonardo da Vinci and the Enigma of a Self-Contained Universe. Leonardo da Vinci, painter of the Mona Lisa and The Last Supper, inventor, scientist, anatomist, engineer, architect, botanist, musician, writer, the ultimate Renaissance man. Born out of wedlock on April 15, 1452, near the Tuscan town of Vinci, Leonardo's life was one of boundless curiosity and extraordinary achievement. And, as far as historical records show, he never married and had no known children. His personal life, particularly his intimate relationships, remains one of history's most tantalizing enigmas. Leonardo's single status was not necessarily unusual for artists of his time, some of whom lived unconventional lives. However, his seemed to be a more profound state of self-containment. He dedicated his existence to observation, experimentation, and creation. His notebooks, thousands of pages filled with drawings and writings on every imaginable subject, reveal a mind constantly at work, a mind that seemed to find its primary companionship in the pursuit of knowledge and beauty. There is much speculation, but little concrete proof about Leonardo's sexuality. In 1476, when Leonardo was 24 and an apprentice in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio in Florence, he was one of several young men anonymously accused of sodomy involving a 17-year-old male model. Sodomy was illegal and could carry severe penalties. Leonardo was formally charged twice. The charges were eventually dismissed for lack of evidence or corroborating witnesses, possibly due to the intervention of powerful friends. This episode, however, has fueled centuries of discussion about whether Leonardo was homosexual. If he was, the pseudo-condemnation of homosexuality at the time might have been a strong reason for him to avoid any public or permanent partnerships, and perhaps even to cultivate an air of celibacy or intense privacy regarding his personal life. Marriage to a woman, in that context, would have been a societal expectation he might have wished to avoid for personal reasons. Regardless of his sexual orientation, Leonardo's life was characterized by an intense focus on his work and studies. He was known to be charming, handsome, and a good conversationalist, but he seemed to keep an emotional distance. His primary relationships appear to have been with his male apprentices and assistants, some of whom lived with him for many years. Salai Gian Giacomo Caprotti da Orino entered Leonardo's household around 1490, when he was about 10 years old, and stayed with him for nearly 30 years. Leonardo described Salai as a thief, liar, obstinate, and a glutton in his early notebooks. Yet Salai inherited Leonardo's vineyard and possibly the Mona Lisa upon Leonardo's death. Another long-term companion and assistant was Francesco Melzi, an aristocratic young man who joined Leonardo around 1506 and remained with him until his death, becoming his principal heir and executor of his artistic and scientific estate. These relationships were clearly significant, but their exact nature remains debated. The joys of Leonardo's single or at least unmarried life are evident in the sheer breadth and depth of his accomplishments. His freedom from domestic responsibilities allowed him to travel, to serve various patrons, including Lorenzo de' Medici, Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, Cesare Borgia, and King Francis I of France, and to dedicate himself entirely to whatever captured his insatiable curiosity. Imagine the time spent dissecting human corpses, at least 30 of them, he claimed, to understand anatomy, sketching birds in flight, to design flying machines, or meticulously layering paint to achieve the sfumato effect that makes his portraits so lifelike. This was a life of profound intellectual and artistic liberty. His notebooks are a testament to this. They are filled with observations on everything from the flow of water and the structure of plants to plans for war machines and designs for ideal cities. He wrote in mirror script, possibly to keep his notes private or because he was left-handed and found it easier. This vast internal world was his domain. Were there sorrows or loneliness? It is hard to say. Leonardo rarely wrote about his personal emotions. He was a master of observation of the external world, but less so of his internal one, at least in his writings. Perhaps his intense engagement with his studies and art filled any void. He valued independence, writing. The painter must be solitary, for if you are alone, you are completely yourself. But if you are accompanied by a single companion, you are half yourself. This suggests a conscious choice for solitude to protect his creative integrity. He was known to be a vegetarian, or at least to have strong feelings about animal welfare, which was highly unusual for his time. He reportedly bought caged birds in the marketplace just to set them free. This compassion, combined with his scientific detachment in other areas, paints a complex picture of the man. Leonardo died on May 2, 1519, in Amboise, France, at the age of 67, with his friend and patron King Francis I, reportedly at his side. He left behind a relatively small number of finished paintings, but an immense legacy of ideas and a new standard for the fusion of art and science. His single life, free from conventional bonds, allowed him to become a universe unto himself, a universe he explored with unparalleled genius. He showed little interest in creating a family lineage, preferring instead to create a legacy of knowledge and beauty that would endure for centuries. His Mona Lisa smiles enigmatically, perhaps reflecting the inscrutable nature of the man who created her, a man who found his world within himself. Number 1, Queen Elizabeth I, and the reign of a single mighty heart. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin, Queen Gloriana. She ruled England and Ireland for an astonishing 44 years and 127 days, from November 17, 1558, until her death on March 24, 1603. Her reign, known as the Elizabethan era, was a golden age of exploration, literature, and national pride. And she did it all without a king by her side. Her decision to remain unmarried was not just a personal choice. It was a political masterstroke and a defining feature of her incredibly successful rule. Born on September 7, 1533, Elizabeth's early life was fraught with peril. Her father, King Henry Ving, had her mother, Anne Boleyn, executed when Elizabeth was not yet 3 years old. She was declared illegitimate and spent years in a precarious position, navigating the turbulent reigns of her half-brother Edward VI and her half-sister, Mary I. These experiences undoubtedly shaped her cautious, pragmatic, and fiercely independent nature. When she ascended the throne at the age of 25, England was religiously divided, financially strained, and threatened by powerful European rivals. From the very beginning, the pressure on Elizabeth to marry and produce an heir was immense. Her counselors, Parliament, and even foreign powers urged her to choose a husband. Marriage for a queen regnant was seen as essential for stability, for alliances, and for securing the succession. The list of suitors was long and distinguished, including King Philip D. of Spain, her former brother-in-law, Archduke Charles of Austria, Eric Ziv of Sweden, and two French princes, the Duke of Anjou and later the Duke of Alençon. Elizabeth, however, was a political genius. She used her single status as a powerful diplomatic tool. For decades, she skillfully dangled the prospect of her hand in marriage to play one European power against another, keeping England safe from foreign domination and maintaining a delicate balance of power. She would entertain proposals, engage in lengthy negotiations, and then artfully find reasons to decline or postpone. This kept potential enemies hoping and potential allies sortive. But was it all just political strategy, or did Elizabeth genuinely prefer to remain single? She famously told Parliament in 1559, early in her reign, "And in the end this shall be for me sufficient that a marble stone shall declare that a queen having reigned such a time lived and died a virgin." Later, she declared she was married to her kingdom, and that her subjects were her children. This rhetoric transformed her singleness from a perceived weakness into a symbol of her unique dedication to England. She cultivated the image of the Virgin Queen devoted solely to her people, almost like a secular version of the Virgin Mary, a powerful symbol in a country still grappling with religious identity after the Reformation. The joys of her single rule were manifest. She held supreme authority. There was no king to challenge her power, or foreign prince consort to sow division or pursue his own country's interests. She was fiercely intelligent, highly educated, fluent in several languages, and possessed a sharp political mind. She chose her counselors wisely, like William Cecil, Lord Burghley, and Sir Francis Walsingham, but she always made the final decisions. Her long reign brought stability and fostered a sense of national identity. England flourished culturally, with playwrights like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe, and militarily most famously with the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, a victory that cemented Elizabeth's legendary status. Of course, there were sorrows and immense pressures. The succession was a constant worry. Without a direct heir, the threat of civil war or foreign intervention upon her death loomed large. This was a heavy burden for her to bear throughout her reign. There were also personal costs. While she had close male friends and favorites, like Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, whom she had known since childhood and possibly loved, she never allowed any personal relationship to compromise her position as queen. The rumors about her and Dudley were intense, especially after the suspicious death of Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, in 1560. Marrying him then would have been a political disaster. She chose her crown over, perhaps, her heart. As she aged, the problem of her singleness became less about marriage and more about who would succeed her. The execution of her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1587, a Catholic claimant to the English throne, was a decision that reportedly caused Elizabeth great anguish, but one she deemed necessary for the security of her realm. "But I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England, too." She lived to be 69 years old, an advanced age for the time. Her final years were marked by the deaths of close friends and a sense of melancholy, sometimes called her seedy. Yet she remained queen to the end. Her unmarried state, a subject of endless speculation and political maneuvering for decades, ultimately became a cornerstone of her iconic image. She proved that a woman could rule, and rule magnificently, on her own terms. She turned what society saw as a deficiency, her lack of a husband, into her greatest strength, dedicating her entire life and her formidable will to the service of her kingdom. Her reign was a personal triumph and a national epic, led by a queen who dared to remain single and sovereign.